Hello, welcome to Forest Focus. The PSR transfer window is past and a new financial year is upon us. How are Nottingham Forest set to deal with the challenges going forward, and how will football finance regulations develop in the next few years, potentially presenting a whole new set of challenges? Joining me to discuss all that is well-known football finance expert Kieran Maguire. Kieran, good to have you with us again. How are you doing?
All is good. There's no such thing as an end of season in the world of football finance, as many Forest fans will probably be testifying, having just been through the nightmare of the 30th of June, and now we're back into effectively focusing on the next season and the developments there. But all good, all set for the Euros, for what's left of them, and keeping my fingers crossed for England, of course.
Yes, of course. I was going to ask this at the end, actually, but we're recording this before the semi-finals. I think it'll come out just after semi-finals, so we can see how accurate you are. We're just about to start Spain v France. Give us a prediction for that.
I think it's going to be a fairly dull match, but Spain have been the best team in the tournament, and they deserve to get through. But France have got the best player in the tournament, who's not yet played very well. So my heart says Spain, so I'm going to go with my heart.
And England?
I think England have a fairly comfortable victory. That might be due to the fact that I've got a ticket for the final, and therefore I'm willing. I'm willing them to win, of course, but we'll have to wait and see. I don't think England have been as bad as people have made out. They could have done better, but they've always looked solid at the back. And you look at the sides that have won tournaments historically, they've tended to be with the ones with the decent defences.
Yeah, I think you're right about the defensive solidity point in tournament football. Greece Euro 2004 springs to mind. Right, let's get into some football finance chats. As Willie said at the top there, Forest and a few other clubs were pretty pressed around June the 30th to get things through. They did it by hook or by crook, certainly, with Forest selling Niakhate, Mangala and Odysseas Vlachodimos for, I would say, pretty generous fees. In return, Forest have signed Elliot Anderson for about 30 million. And there's a few bits of talk around other deals, which we'll get to. But just in general terms, from the outside looking in, do you feel like Forest are probably in pretty solid shape right now going forwards, having survived a scare, we hope?
I think you've described it absolutely correctly there, Matt. They've survived the scare. There were 6 clubs who weren't on the naughty step, but were being monitored carefully. I was commissioned by one of the broadcasters to do some analysis of 6 clubs, which were Forest, Leicester, Chelsea, Newcastle, Villa, and Everton. And I think it's fair to say that all 6 of those have been involved in selling players before the end of June. If we take a look at the total sales in the first 2 weeks of the window, and we compare that to the last couple of seasons, it's been about 4 or 5 times the amount. So this soft transfer deadline of the 30th of June, which is driven by the accounting, clearly has come to the fore. But I would imagine most clubs are satisfied that they've all done enough to avoid going before Richard Masters and his merry men's finger-wagging panel, with the potential consequences that brings from a footballing perspective. I would imagine the possible exception of Leicester, who have got some historic issues to deal with in terms of the last time that they were in the Premier League. What Leicester have tried to do is look at the small print of the Premier League constitution and persuade the Premier League that Leicester weren't in the Premier League, so therefore charges can't be brought. And they successfully managed to prove to the EFL that they weren't members of the EFL when these misdemeanors occurred, so therefore they couldn't be prosecuted by the EFL. So they're in some sort of hinterland, some sort of vortex of non-existence. But I'm pretty sure that they were playing football last season and the season before somewhere, if not necessarily particularly successful in their final season in the Premier League.
Yes, Leicester seem to have gone to war with the authorities, and they're exploiting any loophole they can find that sounds like it doesn't exist to me. But just in general, the loopholes around transfer fees being arguably accelerated. It's a difficult thing to prove, I think, because clubs have overpaid historically. Look at Anthony at Man United off the top of my head and stuff like that. But would you expect some kind of action from the Premier League to stop these kind of inflated sales next season going forwards?
I'm not so certain, because I'm not sure that there's a desire from enough clubs to bring in a stricter set of rules. The very fact that we've got 6 clubs involved here, and I would imagine there'd have been 1 or 2 others who were looking, thinking, well, there for the grace of God go I. So given that you need 14 clubs, you need a 2/3 majority to change the rules of the Premier League. Why change the rules to make life more difficult for yourself? If I was a chief executive, or I was a club owner, I might say, I don't really like them. And I know that there's 1 or 2 clubs in the Premier League who are fairly fed up with what's taken place. But we've seen Chelsea drive a coach and horses through the rules, through selling hotels and car parks to themselves. So it just makes the whole system's a mockery. In terms of the original intentions of what was financial fair play and now is PSR, those objectives are not being addressed. They are merely being seen as hurdles through which, having smart accountants, lawyers, and planning people, you can circumvent. It cost the Premier League £30 million last year in legal fees, and what was achieved.
And just one more on Forest before we talk more generally. There's quite a fair bit of talk they'll sign Jake O'Brien or someone like that from Lyon or Palace or that family of clubs. O'Brien for 30 million. Do you know or have any rough idea how much, headroom Forest would have? Because this is year 3 in the Premier League, which does affect the allowed losses somewhat. Have they got a bit more to play with this season or not?
That's right. I mean, and remember, when Forest sign a player, if you sign a player for £30 million on a 5-year contract, it's costing you £6 million plus his wages. So that's the figure which goes into your PSR calculation. We now have the sale of Brennan Johnson, or Player A, as he prefers to be known, which has contributed towards Forest's 23-24 accounts. So that will have helped the bill. You've got some other players who have shifted off the payroll. So you've also got to consider that Forest, as you rightly said, Matt, are now in their 3rd season in the Premier League. So they will actually get the £105 million PSR allowance. That's increased by 26 million or 20, what it is this season as well. So I think there's lots of positives in terms of flexibility. Sponsorship deal, I suspect, isn't huge, but it's solid enough, and at least they've got one, unlike clearly the first season in the Premier League. You'll be much closer to what's happened in terms of ticket prices than I am. But I don't think, even if you increase ticket prices by 20%, it doesn't actually move the dial very significantly from a PSR point of view. If you're averaging £1 million a match from season tickets and ticket sales, and that goes up to 1.2 million a match, it's not going to make a lot of difference over the course of a season. You'd be far better off selling a promising 20-year-old and just banking some profits from that.
Yeah, I mean, they put them up significantly. The average was 24%, but yeah, as you say, how much of a dent that really makes is another topic. I feel like we're all becoming, as fans, not experts, obviously, but amateur, kind of people around PSR amortization. I did text you a few months ago or weeks ago in a panic about how does this actually work, but I feel like I got my head around it a little bit, and now I think the rules might change with a new system coming in around. It feels like it's linked more to stadium income, commercial income, stuff like that. Just can you give fans a kind of an overview of what might happen around football finance regulation and the Premier League in the next year to 5 years, potentially?
Absolutely. I mean, this season, we have the same old PSR regulations. You're allowed to lose £105 million over 3 years. You can make adjustments for infrastructure spending, academy spending, women's team, community schemes, and so on. So that is set for 24-25. But the feeling we get is that the Premier League is wanting to align itself with UEFA's rules. And that makes a degree of sense, because we did have the somewhat farcical situation about 5 years ago where Wolverhampton Wanderers satisfied the Premier League rules, but they broke UEFA's rules and they were subject to UEFA sanctions because it was their first season in the Premier League. Under UEFA's rules, you're only allowed to lose 60 million euro, for example, for this season. So UEFA's new rules are what they call squad control cost rules. And what this does is it takes 4 income streams: ticket sales, commercial, TV, and profits from player sales. And it says, okay, that's the total money coming in. You can only spend a percentage of that on squad costs. And by squad costs, they mean player wages, which we could have people arguing about, no doubt. Amortization, this word which accountants have been using for decades and nobody else has shown any interest in it, very, very wisely, I hasten to add. But now, as you rightly said, the Twitterati have become experts on this. Agents' fees, because agents are seen as sort of the pantomime dames, the big bad wolves of football, so it's a chance to give them a bit of a kicking. And player write-downs. If you've signed a player and he turns out to be a bit rubbish, what you have to do under the rules is you've got to say, well, do we think we're going to recoup that money from transfer fees? And if not, you can have a write-down. An area which is ripe, by the way, for manipulation. You can have an absolute field day with that. So I think what we're going to see is if you qualify for Europe in the Premier League, you'll be allowed to spend 70% of those income streams on your player costs. And if you've not qualified for Europe, you'll be able to spend 85%. You might be saying, well, hold on, why the difference? Well, the reason for that is that under the expanded UEFA rules, you could probably get an extra £150 million from winning the Champions League. So 70% of that's £105 million. So you see the clubs that are going into Europe have not just ticket sales, commercial income, and broadcast money coming from the Premier League itself, but they also have it coming from UEFA. So because they've got a head start, what the Premier League, I think, is proposing to do is to narrow that gap very, very slightly by allowing the non-European clubs to spend 85%. And it does actually mean that if you qualify for the Europa Conference, you're probably no better off from a financial point of view qualifying for that competition. But it should be remembered, none of us fell in love with football due to amortization. Not even me. And I've made a career out of it. Yeah, so, I've seen some talk about Chelsea were thinking about pulling out of the Europa Conference. What an insult to football fans that is. Yeah, if Forest finish 7th next season and they qualify for the Europa Conference, you'll have an absolute whale of a time. You'll have a fantastic time. I'm a Brighton fan this year. Marseille, Athens, Amsterdam, Rome. These are trips that I'll be talking about for the rest of my life. So I do feel that those people who are saying, "Oh, well, why bother qualifying?" Because they're thinking about it as accountants rather than football fans. And as soon as we go into that mentality, I think we just lost the plot.
Just a quick word for our sponsors of Trent Navigation. Pre-season is, of course, underway for the Reds, which means the return of the Premier League is not too far away now next month. Obviously, the best place to enjoy pre-match build-up in the city is the Trent Nav, and you can watch all televised games in the UK there at the Nav with the Matchday Experience hosted by Simon Fotheringham. They've got the bigger outdoor space now. They've got the outdoor pizza oven, 2 big screens and 2 bars to make sure you aren't queuing for too long. So do get down to Nav to enjoy the matches. And here is a quick word from friend of the show, Matt Ford, just to remind you how good it is down there.
And not just great beers, but immaculate inside. Cobs on the bar. What more do you want? I would say it was well priced as well. And then obviously, as you know, the big shed outside and what they've done on match days is phenomenal. That's become, when I first started, as a kid, I never really heard of the Trent Nav as like a big place to go. And then the last few years, it's really grown in stature as a pre-match place to go. I love it. And I love the fact that it's on the way to the ground. And I just love everything they've done with it. It's great.
Cobs on the bar, indeed, as a few people often drop in the comments in reference to that comment from Matt. Right, thanks very much, and back to the show. As Forest, as I sit here today with a club with a 30,000 seat stadium capacity, that it might improve in the next few years potentially. A reasonable gambling shirt sponsor, a hefty wage bill that's come down with contract ending and stuff like that. Do these new rules benefit Forest, or does it put them at a disadvantage from day one?
I've got to be honest, Matt. It doesn't make a huge amount of difference. I've looked at the numbers, and we've got one or two benefits. And remember, we don't know what proportion of Forest total wage bill is in respect of players. So that there are so many unknowns. In terms of agents' fees, yes, the Football Association publish a list of agents' fees, but not all agents' fees necessarily are chargeable from a PSR or whatever we're going to call these new rules point of view. So the numbers that I have crunched indicate to me that if you were having problems with PSR, they're broadly going to be transferred across to the new set of rules. Because you must already have been paying a significant proportion of your money in the form of wages, and therefore that 85% is going to continue to be an issue. If we take a look at Forest's position here, and I'm just calling up my Forest spreadsheet, in the first season in the Premier League, Forest spent £94 on wages for every £100 which came in through its main income sources. Now, we have to throw in player sales into that. So for 23-24, you've got the sale of player A, which adds £40 million profit. 85% of that, we're talking what, 35.5 million pounds in terms of extra wages. So what we will see is tinkering by clubs in a very similar manner to what we've seen as far as the most recent 30th of June set of shenanigans is concerned.
Do you think, you referenced there about your own, you forged a career in this, which I don't know if you ever expected to do, have a media career in football finance. Has it got just too complicated and too much of a distraction from the actual action that we witness on the field? Even as someone who I'm sure is an expert and revels in all this stuff, is it just gone a step too far in terms of regulation now?
It's been a step too far as my marriage is concerned. I did over 800 interviews last year for TV, radio, podcasts, various media outlets, and so on. I don't think so. If I was a football fan who has no interest or no particular interest in this, I would stay that way. The reason why it has become an issue is that we have rolling news stations. And by the way, I think Sky Sports are absolutely brilliant. I'm not saying that because I appeared on Sky News earlier today. But I think they do a fantastic job. We've got 5 Live, which I know isn't sport 24 hours a day, but it's considerable amounts of sport. We've got Talk Sport, and we've got Talk Sport 2. They have to have something to talk about. And what they have found is, because these regulations are emotive, because fan bases become weaponized when their club is up on charges or potential charges, and because fans of opposing clubs use what they perceive to be financial cheating, financial doping, as a means of hitting other clubs across the head with a stick, it becomes an issue, and it drives clicks. So I think we've ended up with the system that we deserve. If football fans collectively said, this is all a bunch of hogwash, I just want to go down the pub with my mates, talk about what we think is going to be in the match today, go watch the football afterwards, have the wind down, have the diagnosis as to what went right and what went wrong, and completely ignored all of this nonsense. For the vast majority of clubs, has zero impact. It's ludicrous. I mean, I've already been booked. Manchester United's third quarter results come out at midday on Thursday. So this will, we appreciate this show's going out on Friday. And I've already been booked by TV stations and radio stations to talk about them. I go, you weren't interested in talking about this 5 years ago. You weren't interested in talking about this 10 years ago. You weren't interested in talking about this when the Glazers first arrived in English football, and they put Manchester United into a quite precarious position. So why the obsession now? It generates clicks. I think we are the guilty parties. I think everybody collectively should say it's a load of old hokum. Ignore it. Let's go back to slagging off the referee and saying that new left back we've signed is a bit bobbins.
Oh, we've done plenty of that at Forest, especially left backs. Do you think as well, just within the game, within the Premier League specifically, did Everton getting a points deduction send a bit of a shockwave for some of these clubs who thought maybe we might just get away with it as we have done in years gone by?
I think it set a precedent, and clearly that followed in terms of what happened with Forest. We've got the overhang of the Manchester City, A, the Manchester City case, and B, the Manchester City counterclaim with regards to the validity of some of the rules. We've got a potential huge case coming up in the European Court of Justice, which could conclude that the transfer system as we know it is an infringement of employment rights, and could say that transfer fees are therefore inappropriate. So that there are certainly ramifications, but those clubs who thought, well, if Everton get a 3 or 4 point penalty, we know where we are relative to Everton, so therefore, worst we'll get is a 1 or 2. We can factor that in. When Everton were given that initial, was it 10 point penalty, that did send huge shockwaves amongst those people who are in the boardroom, because the very fact that we named checked those 6 clubs earlier as being close to the wall. If Everton had been given a 3 point penalty last season, that was it. I suspect some of them would have said, "Oh, forget it. We'll take that one on the chin, and we'll keep some of our players."
Last question I wanted to ask you before we let you go was around the football regulator. Obviously, we've got a new government have come in. It could be a nice, easy win with football fans to introduce a regulator formally. If that does happen, will it make a big difference to Premier League clubs? Obviously, it'll make, I guess, a difference to clubs further down the food chain. But is a regulator going to send equal shockwaves through the game, or is it being overplayed, do you think, from the financial aspect?
I think the threat of a regulator has been a big issue. The implementation of the regulator, and a regulator was part of the Labour Party manifesto. We effectively have a new sports minister in Lisa Nandy, who represented Wigan, and Wigan Athletic went into administration. It had some horrendous ownership related issues. So I think she's keen to progress it. The test of the regulator is a great thing in theory, because it's a vote winner, and therefore not having it in the manifesto is effectively a vote loser. How it gets implemented in terms of what happens if we have another Gauchen Lie at West Bromwich Albion or Die Younger at Reading, where owners have come in, they've overspent, they've then got bored, they turned the taps off. How does the regulator deal with issues like that? I think they will find that the regulator has relatively limited powers. We've got the Premier League, which is opposed to it. We've got the FA, which is on balance in favour, but not getting particularly excited. We've got the National League, which all of a sudden, a bit like a meerkat, popped up a couple of months ago and says, "Oh, we're in favour of not having a regulator," at exactly the same time as it signed a deal with the Premier League for Premier League's under-21s teams to play in a competition against the National League, and the Premier League is going to subsidise that competition. A cynic, Matt, would say that looks like a bit of a payoff in order to get support for something. But you and I, we're not cynics, are we?
No.
So therefore we wouldn't think that. So we've only got the EFL, which is in favour, and the reason why the EFL is in favour, again, let's look at it purely from a self-interest point of view. The EFL wants more money. The Premier League's told them to go do one. I would therefore expect the EFL to reject any tentative offers from the Premier League, because they know that if they reject the offer, it then goes to the regulator to sort out, and they think they might be able to squeeze a bit more money from the regulator. I think that's a dangerous strategy. I'm not sure it's necessarily the best of strategies either. It can come back to bite you, and it makes the regulator even more unpopular, because you'll have fans of clubs in the Premier League saying, why are we subsidising Stoke City, given that their owner is the highest earner in the country in terms of what Denise Coates gets from Bet365, and she does that very successfully. So there will be negative repercussions, but I think on balance it will help to protect the game. We've already seen rumblings from Jim Ratcliffe about, he called the Super League an initiative. That's not a ringing, well, we don't want any of this nonsense to deal with. So I think in terms of keeping those clubs with owners who are more interested in their own egos and their own bottom line than they are for the benefit of football, I think that's going to be the main thing about the regulator, which will be the thing that you'll never see, because presumably the Super League won't resurrect itself if we've got a government who has got a regulator whose manifest is, if you want to join an external league, then you've got to say goodbye to English football at the same time.
Yeah, Jim Ratcliffe seems to have a lot to say, certainly. I'm going to let you go really quickly. I did have one last PSR question I forgot to ask, just around Forest. Fans are a bit concerned with deals announced into July, after June the 30th. Just quickly, do you have to just evidence that these negotiations were basically completed before July the 1st to satisfy the Premier League?
That's absolutely right. We have something in the world of an accounting called an adjusting post-balance sheet event, which means that if something happens after the 30th of June, which is just tidying up something which was in play before the 30th of June, and if you take a look at the accounting regulations in something called FRS 102, don't do it, kids, you don't want to grow up to be accountants, what you will see is one of the issues is if it's an asset which had agreed to be sold where you finalize the price, which is a classic case in respect of a football transfer, then you can effectively backdate it to the 30th of June. So those deals which went through in early July, I don't see too much of a problem unless the Premier League decides to join the awkward squad. And I think it would be an interesting commission which would have to interpret the rules. Certainly my interpretation of them is that I'm pretty relaxed on those early January transfers.
Yeah, that would be pretty insanely messy business for a lot of clubs and the league in turn. Where can people find more of you, apart from Sky News and 5 Live and all that kind of stuff, but in terms of your own podcast before we go?
Well, thank you very much. A quick plug for The Price of Football. I've been doing this podcast now with comedian and writer Kevin Day, who's become a close friend, even though he's a Crystal Palace fan. So we've been running now for coming up for 5 years in September. We've had something like 16 or 17 million downloads. We've got no idea why, but I think we've sort of just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and we've ridden the wave of interest, as you were saying earlier yourself, that everybody now is a football finance expert, and we're just two old men who have a moan about what's happening in the world of football from a business lens. There's 1,000,001 podcasts which are niche in terms of dedicated to individual clubs, such as your good self, and that's absolutely fantastic. It gives a voice for the fans. And then there's the big beasts. We've got Lineker and Alan Shearer and so on. We've got The Guardian with Max and Barry, who've got in there early and do a fantastic job. And we're a bit like you. We are a sort of a niche show which covers a particular area.
Excellent. We shall let you go. If people have enjoyed this, do us a favor and do hit like on the video. Do subscribe. You can become a channel member and leave us a lovely review on iTunes. The French players are about to sing their lovely national anthem, I'm sure. So we shall let Kit. I think France and Italy are the best national anthems, and Wales, but they're not there.
Oh yeah, yeah. Scotland
It's
Have
a
a
good
good
one,
bellow.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, before the rugby, for especially
Yeah.
Flower of Scotland. Right, we'll let Kieran go. Great to have him with us. We shall be back. I'm not sure when because of holidays, but certainly in the next few days or on Monday. Right, have a good day, everyone. If we don't see you tomorrow, then we shall see you soon.